They called it junk. They called it crude. They called it a peasant's weapon, fit for mud, not for modern war. German soldiers laughed when they first picked one up from fallen Soviet troops. Rough wood. Simple machining. No polished finish. No elegant lines like the pride of the German army, the Karabiner 9AK. But by the winter of 1941, the laughter stopped, because that trash rifle kept firing. In snow and mud. In blood. While German rifles froze solid. This is the story of the weapon the Wehrmacht underestimated. The rifle that armed millions of Soviet soldiers. The rifle that marched from the ruins of Moscow to the burning streets of Berlin. This is the story of the Mosin, Nagant, and how a trash rifle helped destroy the Wehrmacht. When Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, he believed the Soviet Union would collapse in weeks. The Wehrmacht was the most experienced army in Europe. It had crushed Poland. It had humiliated France. Its soldiers carried the finely crafted Karabiner 98K, accurate, reliable, precise. German engineering at its finest. Across the border stood an army that looked broken before the war even began. The Red Army had been purged. Its officer corps shattered. Its supply lines chaotic. And in the hands of most Soviet infantrymen was a rifle designed in the 19th century, the Mosin Nagant. Designed in 1891, older than the automobile, older than most modern nations. To German observers, it looked primitive. The bolt was stiff, the safety awkward, the recoil heavy. Its long wooden stock felt outdated compared to sleek Mausers. It was not refined. It was not elegant. It was not admired. But it was something far more dangerous. It was simple, and in war, simplicity is survival. The first shock, when German forces pushed deep into Soviet territory, they captured thousands of Mosin rifles. Many Wehrmacht soldiers initially dismissed them. Compared to the smooth cycling of the Kar 9AK, the Mosin's bolt felt rough. Compared to German craftsmanship, its finish seemed crude. But then autumn came. The roads turned to rivers of mud. Vehicles sank. Supply trucks stalled. Men marched through thick sludge, weapons clogged with dirt. Metal corroded. Oil thickened, and then winter came. Temperatures dropped below 30°C. Breath froze mid-air. Lubricants turned to glue. German rifles, engineered with tight tolerances for precision, began to freeze. But the Mosin, Nagant kept firing. Its loose tolerances, once mocked as sloppy, now became an advantage. Dirt had space to move. Ice had room to form without locking the mechanism. Soviet soldiers could cycle the bolt with mittens on. They could slam it open against a boot heel if necessary. It was not graceful, but it worked. And in war, working is everything. The rifle of the people. Unlike Germany, which prided itself on craftsmanship, the Soviet Union needed something different. It needed numbers. Factories in Tula and Izhevsk began producing Mosins at staggering rates. Millions were made. Women, teenagers, and elderly workers assembled rifles as German bombs fell nearby. Machinery was evacuated east of the Ural Mountains. Production never stopped. By the end of the war, over 17 million Mosin, Nagant rifles would exist. 17 million. The Wehrmacht was not fighting a professional elite force. It was fighting an armed nation. Each rifle was chambered in 6,000 free-form underneath, a powerful cartridge capable of punching through walls, helmets, and hope itself. The recoil was heavy, yes, but so was its impact, and in the hands of Soviet snipers, it became something terrifying. Stalingrad, where legends were born, in the ruins of Stalingrad, the Mosin, Nagant transformed from infantry rifle to instrument of psychological warfare. The battle was not fought in open fields. It was fought in rubble, in shattered apartments, in factories reduced to skeletal steel frames. Visibility was limited. Every window was a threat. German soldiers began to whisper about unseen hunters. Among them was one name that would echo through history, Vasily Zaitsev. Armed with a scope Mosin, Nagant, Zaitsev hunted officers, machine gunners, and spotters. Each shot carefully chosen. Each kill deliberate. He did not fire rapidly. He did not waste ammunition. He waited, and then he ended lives. German morale began to fracture. Soldiers avoided exposed areas. Officers feared binoculars. Even brief movements could draw a fatal shot. The trash rifle had become a symbol of death. The psychological damage was immense. Sniper duels became myths. Stories grew larger than reality. But one truth remained. The Mosin was deadly accurate when used properly. It was not refined. It was relentless. German realization. By 1942, German troops were no longer laughing at captured Mosins. Many even used them when ammunition was available. The rifle's ruggedness earned respect the hard way. Meanwhile, the Wehrmacht was bleeding. The Soviet Union was not collapsing. It was absorbing. Every fallen soldier was replaced by another carrying the same rifle. Simple to train. Simple to maintain. Simple to produce. The Mosin, Nagant represented something the German war machine underestimated: industrial endurance. While Germany relied on precision and specialization, the Soviet strategy was brutal scalability. Quantity became a weapon. And every Mosin was a brick in a wall the Wehrmacht could not break. Fire superiority through sheer will. The Mosin was not semi-automatic like the American M1 Garand. It required manual bolt operation after each shot. But Soviet doctrine compensated with aggression, massed infantry assaults, overlapping fields of fire, artillery preparation that shook the earth. The rifle did not need to be perfect. It needed to exist in millions of hands. And it did. German soldiers began facing waves of Red Army troops advancing through smoke and snow. Each man with a Mosin. Each willing to fight at close quarters. The rifle's long bayonet became infamous. Soviet soldiers often kept it fixed permanently, charging through trenches with steel extended. Primitive, maybe, effective. Absolutely. Winter 1941, the turning point outside Moscow. German forces stalled. Frostbite crippled divisions. Engines failed. Weapons malfunctioned. Soviet counteroffensives began. Fresh Siberian divisions arrived, hardened by cold, equipped with Mosins that functioned in conditions that crippled German arms. The Wehrmacht was no longer advancing. It was retreating. For the first time in the war, Hitler's armies were pushed back. And in the hands of the soldiers driving them westward was that same 19th century rifle. The Mosin Nagant. The weapon they mocked. The industrial avalanche. As the war continued, Soviet production reached unimaginable levels. Entire cities became factories. Every spare resource turned into weapons. The Mosin required fewer machining hours than many competing designs. It tolerated imperfections. It did not demand luxury. It demanded steel and wood. And the Soviet Union had both. By contrast, German industry struggled under bombing. Precision manufacturing became harder as resources dwindled. The trash rifle was now everywhere. In forests, in cities, in trenches, in sniper nests. It was not the most advanced weapon of the war, but it was the most present. And presence wins wars. Fear changes everything. By 1943, after the disaster at Battle of Stalingrad and the titanic clash at Battle of Kursk, momentum shifted permanently. The Red Army was advancing. Every kilometer west meant another German unit facing the same rifle again and again. It became symbolic, not just of a weapon, but of Soviet resilience. When German soldiers saw its long silhouette through smoke, they no longer sneered, they ducked. By 1943, the illusion of German invincibility had shattered in the frozen ruins of Stalingrad. The Wehrmacht had bled itself white trying to seize a city that refused to die. But even after encirclement, surrender, and humiliation, many in the German high command still believed the Red Army's strength lay in numbers alone, not quality. They told themselves the Soviet soldier was poorly trained, poorly equipped, poorly led. They told themselves the Mosin, Nagant was outdated. Then came the thunder of Battle of Kursk. The largest tank battle in human history is often remembered for armored giants, Tigers, Panthers, T-34s, grinding against one another in seas of steel. But behind every tank, inside every trench, hidden in every tree line, stood men with rifles. Millions of them. And most of those rifles were Mosin Nagants. When Operation Citadel began, German forces expected to slice through Soviet defenses with surgical precision. Instead, they collided with layered fortifications stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Anti-tank ditches, minefields, artillery nests. and infantry positioned with calculated fields of fire. German soldiers advancing through the early morning. Miss quickly learned something chilling. Soviet riflemen did not waste ammunition. They waited until targets were clear. Officers fell first, machine gunners next, radio operators after that. German coordination began to crumble under deliberate, disciplined rifle fire. The Mosin was not automatic. It did not spray bullets. But its 7.62 54 mm cartridge hit with brutal authority. At 300 meters, it could shatter bone. At 600 meters, it could still kill. At longer distances and skilled hands, it remained lethal. And Soviet hands were learning fast. The Red Army had transformed since 1941. Training improved. Doctrine adapted. Sniper schools expanded. The rifle, once handed to barely trained conscripts, was now wielded by hardened veterans. German reports from 1943 increasingly mentioned accurate long-range fire. Patrols hesitated in open ground. Engineers clearing mines suffered targeted losses. Even tank crews, exposed while repairing tracks, found themselves under precise rifle threat. The Mosin, Nagant, was not just present. It was disciplined. The sniper war expands. The legend of Vasily Zaitsev during Stalingrad had inspired thousands. Across the front, sniper units multiplied. Soviet propaganda celebrated them, not merely as killers, but as symbols of patience and intelligence. In forests near Smolensk, in Ukrainian villages, in the marshlands of Belarus, sniper duels became silent wars within the larger conflict. German soldiers armed with the Karabiner 98K and equipped with optics were formidable. But the Mosin sniper variants proved equally deadly. What made the difference was not always the rifle, but endurance. Soviet snipers often lay motionless for hours, sometimes days, in snow that numbed fingers, in mud that soaked uniforms. The Mosin's rugged design tolerated grime that would compromise tighter mechanisms. Even when neglected, it could fire. German field diaries began describing a constant sense of being watched. Morale is an invisible battlefield, and the Mosin was winning it. The rifle in urban hell. As the Red Army began liberating occupied cities, urban warfare intensified again. Buildings shattered by artillery became multi-story killing zones. In stairwells and alleyways, range shrank to meters. The Mosin, long and solid, doubled as both firearm and spear. Soviet troops frequently kept bayonets fixed, turning close combat into brutal clashes of steel and wood. German units withdrawing from Kharkov, Kiev, and later Warsaw described relentless pressure. Soviet infantry did not move cautiously anymore. They advanced with artillery coordination and armored support. Behind tanks rolled waves of riflemen. Each step westward brought the war closer to Germany itself. Industrial endurance vs. technical elegance. Germany prided itself on engineering marvels, Tigers, Panthers, advanced optics, and high-precision rifles. But each masterpiece required time, skilled labor, and materials that were growing scarce under Allied bombing. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union simplified production wherever possible. The Mosin, Nagant was ideal for mass output. Machining processes were shortened. Finishes were rougher. Cosmetic details were ignored. Function over beauty. By 1944, the Red Army fielded not just millions of rifles, but millions of soldiers hardened by years of survival, and the Wehrmacht was no longer attacking. It was holding ground it could barely defend. Operation Bagration. The collapse begins in June 1944. While the Western Allies landed in Normandy, the Red Army unleashed Operation Bagration against German Army Group Center. What followed was catastrophic. Entire German formations disintegrated under coordinated assaults. Soviet artillery crushed defensive lines. Armor punched through weak sectors, and rifle divisions exploited every breach. German soldiers retreating through forests reported relentless harassment from Soviet rifle fire. Supply columns ambushed. Rear guards picked apart. Bridges contested by infantry determined not to yield a meter. The Mosin was there in overwhelming numbers. The Wehrmacht, once the unstoppable force of Blitzkrieg, was now retreating under constant pressure from soldiers armed with the same obsolete rifle they had mocked 3 years earlier. The irony was complete. The rifle had not changed. The balance of power had. By 1945, The war had transformed completely. The Red Army stood at the gates of Germany. Cities once foreign names to Soviet peasants were now objectives on military maps. The Vistula, Oder offensive shattered remaining resistance in Poland. German divisions were under strength, undersupplied, and exhausted. But they still fought, and they still faced the Mosin Nagant. In icy January winds, Soviet riflemen advanced across frozen rivers. Artillery thundered, tanks roared. Yet in countless skirmishes, in barns, tree lines, trenches, victories still depended on the riflemen. The Mosin's report echoed through East Prussia. It echoed through Silesia. It echoed closer and closer to Berlin. The final assault, April 1945. The Battle of Berlin began. The city was a fortress of desperation. Volkssturm militia, Hitler Youth, remnants of shattered divisions, rubble barricades and sniper nests. Urban combat returned with ferocity. In shattered apartments overlooking avenues like Unter den Linden, Soviet riflemen traded shots with German defenders. Every room contested. Every floor a battlefield. The Mosin Nagant was no longer a defensive weapon. It was the spearhead of revenge. German soldiers hiding in basements heard the unmistakable crack of its cartridge above them. Soviet infantry moved methodically, clearing buildings, advancing block by block. When the Reichstag came into view, it was not tanks alone that secured it. It was infantry. Men with rifles climbing staircases under fire. Men with rifles throwing grenades into machine gun nests. Men with rifles fighting through smoke to raise the red banner. The trash rifles stood in the ruins of the capital of the Third Reich. Psychological reckoning. For German veterans who had invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, the sight was bitter. They remembered mocking captured Mosins. They remembered assuming the Red Army would crumble. Now the same rifle symbolized their defeat. Not because it was technologically superior, but because it endured, because it was everywhere, because it armed an entire nation that refused to surrender. When the war ended in May 1945, Europe lay in ruins. Millions were dead. Cities burned. Borders redrawn. The Mosin Nagant did not disappear. It remained in arsenals across Eastern Europe, Asia, and beyond. It served in conflicts long after the Wehrmacht was gone. It became one of the most widely produced rifles in history. Its design was simple. Its finish often rough. But its reliability earned respect across continents. Collectors today may admire polished Mausers or advanced semi-automatics, but historians understand something deeper. The Mosin was not just a rifle. It was industrial, wool forged into wood and steel. It represented a doctrine: endurance over elegance, production over perfection, survival over style. The Wehrmacht fell for many reasons: strategic overreach, logistical failures, Allied coordination, industrial imbalance. But on the Eastern Front, the individual soldier's weapon mattered. And in millions of hands, the Mosin Nagant proved more than sufficient. The rifle that was called trash helped destroy one of the most formidable armies in modern history. Not with sophistication, but with stubborn, relentless fire. They mocked it. They underestimated it. And in the end, it followed them all the way to their capital. The rifle wasn't beautiful. It wasn't advanced. But it never stopped firing. If this story changed the way you see history, hit like a E. It helps this channel survive. Subscribe for more cinematic war stories you won't find in textbooks. And comment below, was this rifle a weapon or a symbol of an entire nation's will?